I went to Christ's Hospital in 1955 at the age of 11, rather young to leave home, and I won't pretend that in the first year I didn't have some moments of sadness, of homesickness, some moments when I was bullied, not by the senior boys, because they had better things to do, but by the people of my own age. There were 5 people of my own age in Coleridge A, which is the house we lived in. 2 of them had come from the prep school where they had started at the age of 8, so they were already experts in the game of survival. The bullying was not so much physical as mental, more like teasing I suppose, but upsetting for all that, and it always tended to be 4 against 1. Now I have to admit that when I was part of the 4 rather than the 1, I was as bad as anybody. But there you go. Margaret used to say that Christ's Hospital had made me hard because you learned to survive. You learned not to show any sign of weakness, and letting out emotions or letting anybody see what your private thoughts might be was a sign of weakness, a chink in the armour that would be exploited. But putting aside the trauma of being wrenched from home at an early age and the unhappiness caused by my peers, then I have to say there were a lot of advantages for being at boarding school. School was not something you did from 9 to 5 days a week. School was something you did all day, every day, and it was your life. And of course that meant that you had plenty of time to take advantage of all of the opportunities there were in the school. I devoted a lot of my spare time to music. I joined the chapel choir as a treble, and later became a bass when my voice broke. I learnt to play the oboe in the band, and was in demand to play in the orchestra and small groups as well. And I also sang in what we called the big school choir, where we did large-scale performances. In this photo of the band, a formal photograph in front of a big school, we zoom in on me, and then on Martin, and then we zoom out again. As well as music, I spent quite a lot of time in Mr. Kirby's lab, a favourite place for those who wanted to pursue scientific hobbies, like catching sticklebacks and newts and putting them in an aquarium. It was here that I also gained my enthusiasm for electronics, which was to serve me later in life, and I made my first crystal set in Kirby's lab. Some of the other pursuits were not optional. I had to play rugger, and because I had to do it, I decided eventually that I'd better do it well, and I got my house colours. We also had to join the CCF, the Combined Cadet Force, and I joined the Signals and really enjoyed it. Here is a Collet house photo from 1958, which makes me 14. Kit Aitken is next to the matron and flanked by a couple of junior housemasters. Behind them are Brown and Iredale, 2 boys from my year. These are the 2 that had been in the prep and had been my chief tormentors in my first year. We move across to Paul and Wade, and here am I next to Peter Hitchcock. So that's all the people of my age. Down at the bottom we find my brother Martin. This must have been his 2nd year, I guess. I could name all of the people in this photo, but I won't bore you now. And while we're about it, a couple more house photos. 1964 shows Martin as a Grecian, and 1965 shows Roger. This is what Collet looked like, marching into dining hall in full force. And this is what they looked like in 1957, when we had an epidemic, when almost everybody was on the sick list. At the age of about 13, you had to decide what subjects you were going to specialise in. My father wanted me to do mathematics. He was an accountant. So I'd seen what sort of work he did, and that didn't appeal to me at all. I wanted to do modern languages, French and German. The school thought that I should do classics, Latin and Greek. And of course my father immediately sided with the school, and that's what I did. Now, I didn't regret doing classics at school. It was very much like solving crosswords at that level. You were sort of solving problems of the language. It was later on, when I went to university, that I sort of fell out with classics. That was when they wanted me to read the literature for pleasure and to appreciate the beauty of the language. Here are a couple of snaps of Martin and me taken at some time or other. Now we have a small selection of photos of various goings-on. I don't know where they came from, but this is clearly Martin's bed with his house number 31, and I recognise at least a couple of the boys, Searle and Teddy Carr in the front. And here are some more boys up to no good. This was probably on the whole-day holiday, when all the boys were let loose in the countryside. Here's Dave Pearl taking off one of the masters, Val Matthews. Some shots of Pirates of Penzance. Paul Wade was the pirate captain, and I was one of his crew. And here I am with Peter Hitchcock, just getting ready for a house play. Peter's adjusting his oranges. I'm not sure who took this photo. Equally, I don't know who took this, a treasured photo of the whole family. There were various regular events at Christ Hospital. The Lord Mayor of London used to come down regularly. I think that was on Speech Day, and we all had to parade specially for him. On that day we also had some visitors from the girls' school in Hertford. I suspect that this Morris dancing was also a special display for Speech Day. Once a year we used to go up to London to visit the Lord Mayor, and that was on St Matthew's Day. The band and all the senior boys used to march through London. Here's a picture of me in the band, and also Martin. The Lord Mayor presented all the boys with the traditional shilling. That's 5p in new money, though I guess it was worth quite a lot more when he originally started. Grecians used to get, I think it was 5 shillings. Anyway, here I am with the Lord Mayor, and I was obviously so handsome that the London Illustrated News chose this picture to publish. Let's just go back to that picture of the band again, because down at the bottom I spotted my old friend Jeff Stern, and it reminded me of the time that we got into some trouble. It started when Jeff said to me, "Have you seen the notice the chaplains put up about the Christian Youth Conference?" Well, that didn't sound particularly thrilling, but Jeff said, "You realise it's in the Horsham High School, which is a girls' school." Well, of course, our names were quickly on the top of the list, and the list soon filled up, and we only had one thought in mind. So to cut a long story short, it wasn't long before Jeff and I were inviting a couple of nice young ladies out to tea in Horsham, several times in fact, until inevitably we got seen by a master and reported. Now I knew I was in trouble as soon as I got summoned to kit study, and he called me Heine instead of Peter. So I had to give him all the lowdown. And at one point he said, "What school did they go to?" So I said, "Heysham Hall School." Well, at that point he couldn't keep a straight face, and we had a good chuckle. And he told me the headmaster had been consulted, and the school doctor had been consulted, and the school doctor said, "Well, it's better young ladies than little boys." And then Kit said, "Well, the headmaster will make a decision in a few days." Anyway, when the headmaster finally made his decision, it was that we could go and see these young ladies, because the school secret service had done investigations and found they were nice young ladies. In fact, the young lady that I was going out with lived next door to our maths master, and we could go and see them as long as we got permission from the housemasters first. Well, of course, that was a very smart move, because having to ask Kit and having him leer at you every time you wanted to go into Horsham, that soon made things come to a natural end. Here are a few photographs of me as a top tabler playing a board game, and then generally messing around. Colin Pinch, Paul Wade, me, and Grubby Brown making some sort of funny gesture. And here I am as a Grecian, taking part in mock worship of a pineapple that we borrowed from a park bench on Big Side. I just mentioned that I was a Grecian, which meant that I was expected to win a place at either Oxford or Cambridge. It was a significant honour in the school, and was marked by a different coat, with a velvet collar and cuffs, and lots of large shiny buttons down the front. Taken on the same day is this photo of my mother and father. Obviously my mother knew, because I was a Grecian, that I was expected to go to Oxford or Cambridge, and she also knew that my A-level results were good enough to get a state scholarship. But unfortunately, she died 3 months before the entrance exams to university, so she never knew that I got my place at Jesus College, Cambridge. By the time I'd reached my last year at school, it had become quite common practice for the senior boys to leave once they'd got their place at university, and to go off on the sort of gap 6 months. Well, of course, this was playing havoc with the school's arrangements for running the school, which depended upon the senior boys almost entirely. So they offered a special deal. If you stayed on, you hardly had to go into any lessons. For me, I think it really meant only having to go into the headmaster's Homer class once a week. Of course, I had to be seen to be doing something, and I volunteered to teach myself Italian. So the school gave me some records, and I got a teach yourself book, and I listened to classical music instead, and I went out and played tennis in the summer. Well, this was all very fine until about halfway through the summer term, when I bumped into the head of the modern language department, and he said, "Oh, your oral's in a couple of weeks' time." And I said, "My oral?" And he said, "Yes, your Italian O-level oral. The school wants to make sure you've been doing some work." "Oh, yes, of course," I said, and went away in a complete panic. Well, I found out that I'd got exactly 30 days to the written exam, and there were 30 chapters in the Teach Yourself book, so that worked out rather neatly, 1 chapter a day. And as for the oral, well, I turned up to that, and this lady was sitting at her desk, and she was writing, and then she looked up. She said, "What have you come for?" And I said, "Italian O-level." "Oh," she said, "I've had such a morning. I've been doing French and German A-levels, and now they want me to do Italian. Anyway, what are you doing learning Italian?" So we had a little chat about this. And then she suddenly said, "Hey, you should be telling me this in Italian." So I said something about I'd got some discs and a couple of books. And she said, "Yes, okay, fine. How about I give you 20 out of 30? Will that do?" I said, "That'll do just fine. Thank you very much." And in due course, I took the written exam. And from Italian into English was an absolute doddle. I mean, it was much easier than doing Latin or Greek unscenes. And I somehow managed to do some translation from English into Italian. And I passed my O-level. Real wonders never cease. Christ Hospital has its own railway station on the main line to Brighton. There used to be a branch line to Guildford, and the Guildford Slacker used to go down that. The main line to Brighton still runs through the station, but Dr. Beeching closed down the line to Guildford during the 1960s, and now it's totally overgrown. If you look round the school nowadays, you will find a number of minor differences. Looking at the school from Big Side, you can see where the music school used to be. It's now a magnificent arts centre. Dining hall still looks the same, and the Verio picture is still there, but you find they've moved the tables round. And if you go out the back, the difference in the kitchens is amazing. Self-service counters, heavens knows what. The chapel is still the chapel. The quad is still the quad. And Christ's Hospital is still magnificent.